If you came here looking for info about the Gatling Barrage, you'll be disappointed. We're talking about explosions, things that go boom, that rattle your teeth, and give the enemy the big D. That's right, democracy. I spent a long time looking at the 380, 120, and Walking Barrages. But how do they work? Last I heard, they were random. So let's talk about that. Let me take you on my journey exploring the idea that the 380mm, 120mm, and Walking Barrages do not distribute themselves randomly. I have read through many Reddit posts about barrages, and the word random is used frequently. I've also heard it in countless YouTube videos. The comment sections across these posts and videos, for the most part, do the typical spiral into the just run Eagle Strikes and 500 kg bro type of responses. The perceived randomness of these stratagems is certainly warranted, as they definitely appear random. When you throw one of these in and get busy dealing with some bots, you're not exactly analyzing strike patterns. To me, I throw one in, it does what it does, and I move on. So I found a few corners of the galaxy to quietly observe their destructive nature. The data collection and analysis phase of this video took around 25 days of my time. It was a wonderfully awful experience. I started this process to find answers. I found them, but they led to more questions, and more answers, and more questions. I had to end the study. The workload I found myself faced with was astounding. If you study something long enough, eventually, you know enough to know that there is much more to learn. The first study I conducted was here. I stood atop this rock in this location, readied my stratagem, aimed directly for the joint on the windmill, and let it rip. Every single test was conducted with the same throw, which resulted in the stratagem landing in the same spot. After the destruction was over, I jetpacked down and took a point location of the stratagem. I moved around the blast area, gathering similar points. I know, I can hear it now. What's up, Cash? You gonna take some distance readings with your Liberator again and call it a day? No, I'm running a slugger. Besides, I had something more elegant in mind. These points I'm collecting are very special. They're ground control points. A what? What's a ground control point? Well, they're used for georeferencing imagery. Okay, what is that and what imagery are you talking about? To get imagery, I simply die. You see aerial imagery every single time you die. And as far as what georeferencing is, this is georeferencing. If you recall from my armor video during the scout passive section, I mentioned that each grid is 13 meters by 13 meters square. That provides me a scale and a manner in which to align my points from the map. Since the map we see in-game has infrastructure and terrain pieces on it, I can georeference the image to fit nice and neat with the ground control points. Now I can perform any spatial study I want, and it is to scale. Welcome to the wonderful world of geographic information systems, and more specifically, geostatistics. Simplistically, there are 4 types of data in GIS: points, lines, polygons, and pictures. In the realm of GIS, there are a load of variables that can influence outcomes of data, such as image tilt. This occurs when looking at 3-dimensional terrain from above it, and the focal point of the imagery changes, tilting everything outward. This is why the word ground is in ground control point. To georeference imagery, it's important to align things from points on the ground and not at elevation, like the top of a rock or building, since these can move. The ground cannot. That is all that you need to know. This is all good enough for what we're after. Answers. My goal, in the beginning, was to quantify the destructive power across these stratagems to compare them as equals. I drew polygons around the impact areas, hoping to leverage the area of displacement of Earth to determine the amount of overlap of ordnance from these stratagems as a ratio. Snow-covered planets create great contrast for this task. Remember, every time I take a new sample, I have to georeference the image to be able to draw the polygons. I measured the diameter of an impact crater for each stratagem and began making a table full of beautiful, beautiful data. I knew the salvo count, volley count, the number of rounds fired per volley. I compiled that with the planar area of each crater created. Planar meaning flat. I'm not measuring volume or surface area in 3 dimensions of the impact crater. I'm measuring the area of the highest point of the crater as a flat surface. like a disc. This gave me the maximum destructible area possible if there were no overlapping ordnance. I was almost done. The 380 and 120 had the same pattern, but one was smaller. The Walking Barrage had great distribution and a very clear pattern. I had 5 samples of each. Surely, that's enough to prove the stratagems are predictable, right? Atmospheric monitoring became a thing, and I had already killed my map seed from Study 1. I found a new map, and I took a couple of samples of the 380 and 120 to establish a new baseline. I purchased atmospheric monitoring and took 3 samples of 380mm and 3 samples of 120mm from the same area in the same manner I established with the new baseline. By the time I was about done, I came to the realization that the visuals from impacts can be hidden under terrain like mountains, rocks, and sometimes even dunes. This could create a lot of inconsistency in the data I had gathered, so I did my best to guess where the extents of the areas of displaced Earth were. Not quite scientific. It was about this time that I noticed the order in which ordnance dropped was consistent across the 120 and 380. It was the same pattern, in the same order, every single time. Same with Walking Barrage. I tested that here as well. I was curious if atmospheric monitoring would affect it. It doesn't, but you never know unless you look. This really was shaping up to be quite the study. I was very content with my findings. But I wasn't happy with my guesswork concerning areas of displaced Earth from the 380 and 120, so I found a new map seed that provided a great location to get much more accurate information. This is also where I tested being in the middle of a 380mm strike after purchasing atmospheric monitoring. You can, but I suggest you lay down. I have a Google Sheet in the description. You'll find the vast majority of my work in there, areas and perimeters of polygons for the displacement of Earth, imagery with grid overlays, impact locations and ordinality, quantification of blast area overlap, and distances from each stratagem throw to every impact. Atmospheric monitoring, something I set out to quantify, is shown here as well. You can see the total distance of every impact from the stratagem location is reduced by about 15% after picking up this ship module upgrade. I also have convex hull diagrams in there. A convex hull is more or less a simplified polygon that creates an envelope around all the points in the study. More or less, it's a very easy way to visually understand point clustering. Looking at the spreadsheet, you'll see that the 15% reduction in spread from atmospheric monitoring reduces the area in which impacts can occur for the 380 and 120 by around 28%. Wrapping up my work, looking forward to actually playing the game some, I decided to double check my theory. 380? Good. 120? Good. Walking Barrage? Different pattern. This is the first time I had tested throwing this stratagem in any direction but south. I had thrown the 380 and 120 from every direction, and it patterns the same. They're always oriented just like this, toward north, and they always have the same pattern, every time. In fact, the intro to this video was that Walking Barrage throw. I needed a new map. I tested and patterned Walking Barrage in every cardinal and ordinal direction, 8 directions in total, from north all the way back to north. Guess what? It was a different pattern in each direction, but each direction's pattern was the same every time I threw it. I mapped everything out and even confirmed that I could replicate these patterns by direction on other planets. I could. I mean, I looked right there. Why? Because I knew where the shell was going to land. I had cracked it. If I knew where a shell is going to land, it definitely can't be random. 8 different patterns made sense to me. Seemed a little overkill on Arrowhead's part, but would certainly make things seem random enough to players. I was down to my last throw for pattern confirmation when this happened. The stratagem bounced off of a rock and modified the throwing direction. Something seemed off about it. I cleaned out a few bots, did the usual, and saw this. A pattern change. Could there really be a pattern for every degree? 360 patterns? Certainly Arrowhead wouldn't go to that much trouble to place 12 shots for one stratagem 360 times. That would be insane. New map, new plan. mapped from 270 degrees to 360 degrees in 10-degree increments, so 10 total tests to see what was really happening to the pattern. As you can see, the placement of each shell migrates toward the northeast at different rates and different angles across arcs. It's slowly morphing into the 360-degree pattern. Maybe the shots aren't coded as a direction and distance from each stratagem based on throw bearing. Perhaps there was something more refined happening here. The Fibonacci sequence crossed my mind, and I'll tell you what, this got me pretty damn excited. It seemed like the shroud of obscurity draped over the Walking Barrage was slipping away. I was onto something. I made it through 320 degrees before scrapping the study for another that would provide much more insight. I took the 8 throws I'd already done, grabbed every impact point and stratagem marker, and aligned all the stratagem markers to be on top of each other. So 8 samples, comprising a 360-degree view of the exact same stratagem location. Looks like a mess, huh? Time to play connect the dots. I connected every same number together into a polygon, and this was the result. These are all 8-sided polygons with a vertex residing at the location of each impact point of the same number around the compass. I assume these shapes are actually circles or ellipses and not my janky shapes. Here is a throw to the north, and to the south, and to the east, and to the west. This provides me enough evidence to discern a decent understanding of how Walking Barrage works. Pick a direction, in this case 45 degrees or northeast, you throw the stratagem. A line is drawn from the centroid or center of each polygon at the bearing you threw the stratagem, and the location along the perimeter of the polygon the line intersects with is where the shell will fall. Quite an interesting solution, I'd say. I don't know much about game design, but from a geography and geometry perspective, it's damn cool. As we move forward, I'll be referring to this as a constellation. It sounds cool, and isn't an entirely inaccurate description. Alright, back to where we left off with the 380 and 120. The pattern change from that south to north throw with the Walking Barrage was shocking to me. I learned my lesson to get my head out of my own study and avoid confirmation bias. It happens from time to time. Before wrapping this package up and putting a bow on it, we need to reconfirm that the 380 and 120 share the same pattern, is always oriented the same, and throwing direction doesn't matter. Easy enough. I've done it before. To save time, both are in my loadout. Knock it out. One dive. There's plenty of room on this map seed for multiple tests, and I'm just confirming shape. So I don't need to be in the same location, which would require a refresh of the map. 380, good. 120, different pattern. I'd like to backtrack to the very beginning of this study. I didn't tell you something. I've seen this pattern before. Once on the 380, which you can see is my first throw shown on the Google Sheet, and once on the 120, which isn't on the sheet. This was across 20 throws, so 10%. I could never replicate it, and I had never seen it since purchasing the atmospheric monitoring upgrade. That is, until now. Alright, 2 dives it is. I went to throw the 120 first this time. The standard pattern revealed itself. Same location even. I had told myself that the oddball pattern was perhaps the result of some terrain type that I couldn't identify. So, the result of the 380 throw would either confirm or debunk this theory. And the 380 has the oddball pattern. Here we go again. Knowing that the 380 and 120 share patterns, and that each can influence the pattern of the other when thrown sequentially, I dumped a 380 and a 120 on top of each other away from my clean testing region. I know these patterns, but I wanted to know if there were more. I found 7 before running out of lives, and I had to exit the game as to not lose the map seed. 7 patterns. How many more could there possibly be? And now that I'm not separating out Walking Barrage from the 380 and 120, does it have different patterns in addition to its constellation? These new developments were disconcerting, to say the least. How much further can I go with this study? How much hard drive space do I have left? Is this whole thing a wash? Will this even be a video that provides any help to anyone at all? My second throw of the Walking Barrage from north to south was a complete disappointment. It had a different pattern too. Pattern 3 was different, and so was pattern 4. What is even happening? How did I get weeks into this study and never come across this? I'll tell you how. I was patterning everything. Every throw was conducted after a refresh of the map seed. Every single one. It was a very certain method for ensuring there was no mixing of impact craters from different throws. It made no sense to wait for the cooldown of Walking Barrage, 380, or 120 to throw it again. I can just exit out of the map, dive in, grab a few super credits from the spawn locations, perform the next part of my study, and repeat. Easy. I would always dive in with the stratagem I was testing, an arc thrower, a jump pack, and a Gatling turret in case I needed them. So we confirmed a 380 throw will change the pattern of a 120 that follows it. This is a fact. Will any orbital stratagem? Yes. Will an eagle stratagem? No. I dove in with orbital EMS, orbital gas strike, and orbital Gatling barrage. These have the 3 lowest cooldown periods of the orbitals. I threw all 3 out of the way of my testing area, moved into position, and threw a Walking Barrage. It's pattern 4. It's the pattern I was expecting. It's the pattern I got. I repeated this same process 4 more times, so I had aerial views of patterns 8, 12, 16, and 20. None of them matched patterns 1 through 4. I refreshed the map, I repeated the process I employed to predict the 4th pattern, but predicted the 20th pattern instead. It was the same as before. It took about 10 minutes to get to this point. Over the next 25 minutes, I revealed every 4th pattern from 20 through 36. None of them matched patterns 1 through 4. I threw Walking Barrage pattern 37 into the mission objective in the center of the map. It also did not match any other pattern. Up to this point, I documented patterns 1, 2, 3, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, and 37 of north to south throws of Walking Barrage. To me, since I had documentation of patterns 1 through 4, if any pattern were to repeat, I would see it by comparing it to these 4. Since it took me 10 minutes to reach pattern 20, the fastest time to reach pattern 40 would be 20 minutes, leaving 20 minutes for testing. I could probably get 4 throws in during this time frame with all the running around I have to do to spread out the patterns on the map. This would get me to the 56th pattern. To get to the 60th pattern, it would take 30 minutes, leaving 10 minutes for testing. You can see where this is going. The max I could probably get to is pattern number 72 before running out of time. The possibility exists for the bearing the player is facing to not be whole numbers, even though that is what we can see. I theorize that the polygons I've derived for impact locations, or constellations, have other polygons they rotate around as you increase the pattern number. I believe the 380 and 120 barrages follow a similar system, except that the player's throw direction has no impact on the orientation of the pattern. There were 2 more things to test before calling it quits on this study. Do other players' orbital stratagem calls impact the distribution pattern I see? Meaning, is the pattern count global across the instance, or is it per player? We tested the 380mm barrage, K3 through the first stratagem, pattern 1 for the 380, as expected. I threw the second one, pattern 1 for the 380. This proves that the distribution pattern is specific to the player and is not global. Just to verify everything is working as expected for other players when I'm the host, L2 threw an orbital EMS strike and then threw his 380. Pattern 2. Perfect. It's predictable. It wouldn't surprise me if the variability in patterns were applied to every orbital stratagem. There could be any number of constellations of the Walking Barrage due to the fact that I've confirmed at least 37 different distribution patterns for a single throwing direction. Since I can predict where shells land within the first distribution pattern of each of the stratagems we've studied, they are certainly not random. Additionally, the changes to the distribution pattern that orient the constellations is also predictable and repeatable, so that isn't random either. In games where critical strikes are present, oftentimes developers will use systems like pseudo-random number generators to more or less build up your critical chance as you strike to more evenly spread out critical hits. In a true random scenario, it's technically possible to get 0 critical hits forever. If the impact locations of these stratagems were actually random, from time to time, people could see something very close to all impacts being on top of each other. Not an ideal scenario, to say the least. I don't quite know how deep this rabbit hole goes, but I do know it's somewhere between 38 distribution patterns and hell. Obviously, Arrowhead wants to obfuscate patterns, and that's really great for gameplay if you look at barrages as firing for effect types of tools. Are the orbital barrages difficult to predictably use? Yes, unequivocally so. But random, they are not. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to explore the barrages with me. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. And if you want to see more content like this, please subscribe. Either or both of these would help me out a lot. And with that, I'm out.